Yeah.
There is bait being thrown out there.
Oh, good.
For people like us to latch on to.
Speaking of the beast system, beast system.
He's a
yes.
Satanist from one of the Satanist churches here where they sacrifice babies.
Yes, the bait. We've seen the bait. The bait made big headlines over on Twitter and everywhere else, and the bait is still loading. So you might have to tell us about the bait. Because does this link work, Gonzo?
It should. Worked for me. New York Times. The taste of cannibalism? Question mark? A spate of recent stomach-churning books, TV shows, and films suggest we've never looked so delicious to one another. With a weird, creepy mirror header with eyeballs on the table. And
from Paulina Almira is the artist of this creepy illuminated mirror of cannibalism. An image came to Chelsea G. Summers, a boyfriend, accidentally on purpose hit by a car, some quick work with a corkscrew and his liver served Tuscan style on toast. That figment of her twisted imagination is what prompted Miss Summers to write her novel, A Certain Hunger, about a restaurant critic with a taste for male human flesh. Turns out, cannibalism has a time and a place. Oh, good. In the pages of some recent stomach-churning books and on television and film screens, Miss Summers and others suggest that time is now.
Okay.
There is Yellow Jackets, a Showtime series about a high school women's soccer team stranded in the woods for a few months too many, which premiered in November. The film Fresh, released on Hulu in March, involves an underground human meat trade for the rich.
You know what's funny? I know, our sort of community of producers and listeners and just kind of truther types have been pointing this out for a long time.
Yes.
They've been really, really going in hard on the cannibalism on mainstream, TV shows and stuff.
Yeah, and the timeline that they kind of lay out here actually fits with that quite well. Yeah. They talk about in 2017, multiple books and TV shows coming out. Tender is the Flesh and Raw, things like that. And they name a few others. There's about a dozen of these things. So in the next section, can you stomach it? A fascination with cannibalism, perhaps not surprisingly, can toe a fine line as, and they say toe, T-O-E. Do you think it's always been T-O-E in toe a fine line? Oh my gosh, this changes everything.
No, I thought, because isn't it like you're coming right up against the line with your toes?
Yeah, it makes way more sense that way. I always imagined it T-O-W.
Like a big old tow truck coming up to...
Like you're pulling, like you're pulling something heavy with a thin thread has always been my image.
Okay, yeah.
But this makes way more sense. All right, this is why learning happens when you read, people.
The more
Towing a fine line with Ms. Summers learned while writing, quote, A Certain Hunger. When fact checkers, get the fact checkers, came calling about the frenzied scenes in which the book's anti-heroine prepares her murdered lovers with grotesque Epicurean flourish, their queries about the intricacies of human butchery left Ms. Summers so disturbed that she went, quote, full raw vegan for 2 weeks. The creator was horrified by her own monster. Publishers may have been too. When Ms. Summers, who uses a pseudonym, was shopping the book around in 2018, it was rejected more than 20 times before Audible and the unnamed press made an offer.
Good for you, Audible.
Audible. So
does Audible?
edgy.
I thought anybody can really publish stuff on Audible. Anyway,
I actually don't know. I don't know how that works. They do Audible originals though. So it's kind of like Netflix. If you make a TV show, you can get it on Netflix, but then you can get Netflix to actually pay for it.
Right.
Like help you make it. If she were selling, quote, A Certain Hunger today, Ms. Summers, who is 59 and lives in New York and Stockholm, believes it would be easier. Quote, God bless Yellow Jackets, she said in a Zoom interview, which was later interrupted by her dog Bob vomiting in the background.
Oh, good.
Okay, we're just talking about more books and things here.
Yeah.
Let's zoom down.
What does a dog vomiting have to... That's why I think I told you that we don't have to read this article. It's really anecdotal in a lot of ways.
It's really cataloging all of the media that has promoted cannibalism in the past, few years. 10 years, let's say.
And going into history too. I mean, they do touch on some of the more historic moments when cannibalism was discussed.
They really love this Yellow Jackets thing. A lot of the Yellow Jackets, let's see here. Do you have anything highlighted?
No. That's why I told you before. I was like, this just keeps going on and yeah.
Yeah. There's something interesting here at the end. According to Miss Summers, cannibalism is always symbolic.
Right.
For her novel's protagonist, eating human flesh can be seen as a way of holding on to a relationship that ended. From Miss Summers herself, the plot of, quote, A Certain Hunger can't be uncoupled from, quote, from my own personal experiences with disordered eating, with the tamping down of feminine appetites, the way the media chews up and spits out writers, bougie consumption, bougie, and bougie lady consumption, she said. More generally, Miss Summers thinks that the recent spate of cannibalistic plots could also be commentaries on capitalism. Quote, cannibalism is about consumption, and it's about burning up from the inside in order to exist, she said. Quote, burnout is essentially over-consuming yourself, your own energy, your own will to survive, your sleep schedule, your eating schedule, your body. Miss Moshfegh and her theory was, quote, that it might be an antidote to the actual horror of what's happening to the planet. Like Miss Summers, Miss Moshfegh at times couldn't stomach her own work, describing the process of writing about cannibalism in Lapvona as a bit disturbing. Quote, I had to think about what part of the body would be an interesting place to start, she said, and how it would feel to hold someone's severed hand in yours. Whew. The prop team on Yellow Jackets had a similarly unnerving task in determining what to use as faux human flesh in the show's pilot episode. Should it be the lab-grown human steak made from stem cells that spurred outrage at a London museum? The animal-free chicken, beef, salmon, dairy substitutes that some companies are creating or using similar technology? Ultimately, the prop team went with venison, but they'll have to find an alternative for future episodes, Ms. Lyle and Mr. Nickerson said, because many in its cast are vegan. And that's how they end the article there.
Yeah, again, good stuff at the end there, but also just overall, it is just a summary of what's been going on. And I think it's indicative of the spiritual climate of just the last few years in this world, and especially in media. Something is driving these authors to tackle this topic in particular, use it as an analogy, whatever it may be. But it's very interesting because there's cannibalism in particular has connections biblically back to the days of Noah and Nephilim and, these giants, some extra biblical text talking about how they were consuming one another, things like that. So it's definitely a sort of depiction of the fallen nature of creation. It's like something is wrong, that the equations are not correct if cannibalism is taking place. So so I think it's indicative of that, but also in the context of the imposter Christianity that we just talked about, it makes perfect sense in my mind to create the divide and conquer, where you have the white Christian nationalist sentiment, and then you are now allowed to be just a little more open about the cannibalism and probably the pedophilia and some of that stuff. That's
we have seen that.
It's culturally taboo, and they're able to bring it because as a cultural counter to the Christian nationalism or whatever.
Sure. I could see it, coming up in like a climate change discussion.
That's what I thought of too when reading some of those quotes at the end when you were reading that. Because
and it really is
eating itself.
And we've, especially sort of the formerly termed fringy, stuff, commentators have talked about how the normalization of things in media ends up becoming, normalized in society.
Right.
And that's kind of how these things work. And it can take a decade or two, but eventually, it gets there. And, we're kind of at a time where that's definitely, you can see that have been playing out and successfully working, at least in a lot of cases. Yeah. And so, of course, the normalization of it is intense, especially when you consider the sort of very strong influences and pressures when it comes to things like eating bugs or lab grown meat and climate change. And, we got to save the planet by eating some Soylent Green, baby. It's the only responsible way to live on Earth.
It is the Soylent Green year. It was set in 2022, so it makes sense that they would you have the campaign, to align with the plan. But I wanted to finish out this segment. Is there anything else you want to say about the cannibalism story?